What's making you so cold at home? Come on and put some clothes on. What's making you so cold at home? Come on and put some clothes on.
The remote work. I am a fan of it, even as I know that it sort of contradicts being concerned about this trend of increasing atomization. I guess everyone maybe who's given this some thought can think of one aspect of this atomization that they can't do without and that they will defend. But in the aggregate, that's just kind of a recipe for the status quo, because everyone's got some aspect of it they don't want to touch, and so because no one can coordinate to stop any one aspect of it, the status quo just continues.
Yeah. No, I think remote work is fine. I mean, I know my father right now, he works 2 days in the office, 3 days at home. And I mean, he frankly, he deserves it. I mean, he's 60 now, so he definitely, I like that he's working from home now. That's great. As for, like, oh, it hurts community life or anything. I mean, frankly, I don't feel like if work is the only pillar of community life, I mean, that's frankly kind of sad in many ways. I mean, work as
Right.
it is, yeah, sorry.
Well, it's sad, but it's probably also quite normal, and I think even socialists, and let's say until the revolution has occurred, even socialists will acknowledge. I mean, if a significant part of your day is spent at work, there's going to be some social aspect of it, and there's some value to that.
Oh, no, yeah, absolutely. But I guess my point was that the promise of, like, oftentimes the promise of capitalism, frankly, in the early 20th century was that working hours would decrease. I think Keynes said something like in 1930,
Right.
We would be working 20 hours a week by the end of the century, or whatever his predictions were. But they were vastly, off completely. I mean, we're working, and that's
thought about that, and there's a lot of status competition around among people who are kind of the top drivers of workplace experience, and he didn't appreciate how much people among like the upper class would think that you're quite lazy if you stop working so much. It seems
but
the upper middle class really driving it.
no,
Among the very top, they're fine checking out.
Yeah.
But
I have no like, obviously I have no problem with people feeling like they have community with their work. I mean, work can be very rewarding, no doubt about it. But the thing is that I wonder, your work environment is not what one would call a civil society. Like a civil society, like I said about the third places. Like, if your life is only work and home, that's a very narrow horizon of, how what you're experiencing and how you're able to, like, view yourself. It's like a, I don't know. Let's just say you've been working the same job for. I mean, this is very general, but if you've been working the same job for, decades, and what you said about, so early socialists, priding themselves on work, bringing a community ethic, that's true. But there was also an element of worker sociability after the workplace. Like, you would go to the pub. Like, this was like a common place for workers to organize, was the pub after work. Of course, it's a very masculine environment, like most of these workers were in industrial labor, so obviously it's mostly men. But nonetheless, there was a place to congregate after work in which everybody went there, and oftentimes there was political conversations, there was intense kind of interpersonal drama, like all kinds of things happened. And this was oftentimes the place where big breakthroughs, political, riots happened, like all kind of exciting things happened after work hours, let's say. And socialists did write about how industrial work, in its repetitiveness, It was often satirized as being making one a machine, like it was like inhuman. It didn't allow for community life, and so what happened after work was seen as like a release, you know. And I get the impression, like most Americans, which Oldenburg mentions in his book On Third Places in 1989, uh, don't have the outlet for stress like would be like as one would need after work. Instead, it's only work and home, and that doesn't really produce a healthy person in many ways. That was
Yeah.
his comment in 1989. And I think it still kind of rings true in many ways.
I a few years before 2020, well, more than a few years, in the early 2010s, we heard a lot of discussion about the way the tech companies were sort of buying off employees by seeking to sort of replace these third locations
Yeah.
with company provided happy hour, a food court like in a mall style experience. So the tech companies trying to make work fun such that you'll be there most of the time. You're home or you're at work, and the things that we would call third locations, things that are not quite work or home, that is also work provided. So that now in retrospect, given remote working and atomization, that almost looks sort of quaint and vaguely admirable. Because if the alternative is just being by yourself, well then getting happy hour with people that you don't really consider close friends, but hey, you work together, looks downright communal.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely, absolutely. And this kind of just to kind of shift gears a little bit. Something I wanted to also bring up with you. Maybe you have some thoughts on it. Um, is that I get the impression that I remember when I was even like when I was like in high school, like the uh, like late 2000s, 2010s. Um, I got the impression like talking about the disruptive, like cognitive disruption of the internet and mobile phones and all of this uh, was seen as like kind of like a passé comment, like, oh, you must be like that's such like a boomer comment or something, like, oh, people are glued to their phones, like how you're so like you're silly for saying that. And there were comics like mocking this. I remember reading them in the paper, like, oh, it's just like when people said people are glued to the paper, like now they're glued to their phones, like, new generation, it's no big deal. But really, I think what's most fascinating to me is that only in the past 2 years I'm seeing people talk about this more and more, like take this skeptical attitude towards a lot of the characteristics of what we would call being terminally online. And that I think is pretty new, and I welcome that conversation because so often it was just like off limits in many ways. Like, oh, just accept the inevitable. Like this is just how it has to be. And yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. How the
yeah,
conversation
there's
shifted recently.
some dissonance, like the kind of younger urban set that is technically savvy. Um, they're more amenable to or more sympathetic to, maybe amenable to socialism and certain socialist rhetoric they find agreeable, but they will end up sort of ipso facto defending tech companies by making fun of the people who would make fun of them or criticizing those who would criticize them. So on the one hand, you can point to like dating apps as why is romance now mediated by some tech company? I mean, like and they'll sort of, yeah, that's pretty lame. But then if you talk about like doing away with dating apps and just meeting people in real life again, I can already see the feminist counterpoint coming. It's
Yeah.
safer to do it this way. Dating apps do seem to give women, they seem to like it more than men. I think the general experience there, um, because they'll cite concerns about safety. If you're physically in someone's proximity, it's harder to get away from them, whereas you can just simply ignore them online on a dating app. So again, there's some dissonance between disliking something in the abstract and then the kind of day-to-day experience with it. And a lot of the kind of anti-woke left will say that modern progressives or pop progressives are essentially libertarian. And for the longest time, I pushed back on that. I said, no, no, no. They want, they want Bernie Sanders style, social democracy or something. How could they be? But the way they actually live day to day, I see now what the old left is saying now about the younger.
Yeah, I think
They are in fact quite libertarian operationally, although they don't agree with it explicitly.
Yeah, I think there's a huge problem now with a lot of the left, frankly, has internalized the antisocial sentiments that are very much in the zeitgeist. And there's this perception like the public is just one giant threat constantly. And I think is a huge problem. Like a lot of people genuinely believe that the public is like, frankly, a large number of them are fascist. A large number of them are openly want to commit violence against a marginalized person. Uh, all of this is really a warped view of, in my opinion, the social recession zeitgeist, because all metrics speak to the fact that society is actually liberalizing. Like along social mores, like people are liberalizing in their worldview, like how they socialize, how tolerant and accepting they are compared to 50 years ago. There's no contest. Like people have, as a society, the U.S. has socially liberalized, but somehow there's like this countercurrent because of the antisocial, the way people are socializing themselves nowadays. There's this like threatening aura about everything. Like, and this is so, it's so warped, and it for me it's like a huge impediment. It's like it's basically like a self-imposed obstacle to having any collective aspiration, because of course this makes collective action practically impossible, and it makes the prerogative of politics just the social management of everybody, you know? And that, I think, is like so full of interpersonal drama and backstabbing, and we see how that goes like online and within organizations that seem to rise and fall and implode practically, months at a time. That's a huge problem right now with political organizing in general, but I see it a lot on the left. And there's some conversations happening right now on that front, how people are projecting, they're projecting threats where they really aren't there, you know. And to even claim this sometimes is met with such rage, like, what do you mean you're downplaying the threat of fascism or something? But I really don't. I just don't accept this idea that the public is so hostile to me, or to anybody really in particular, like on a way that would be so, even a big segment, let alone a majority, would be, you know, have some nefarious, idea of fascism or anything like that. I just don't think it's true.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter that you had read that Damage magazine piece, Antisocial Socialism Club.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Actually,
that's one of the best things I've read there in a while. It actually dovetails very nicely with your social recession piece. And yeah, they kind of get at that. They don't talk about it kind of, or the author doesn't really talk about it kind of. Well, I guess they do. It kind of generalized misanthropy going on among, this wanting socialism while at the same time having such distrust for not only people in some red state, but people in Brooklyn with you right now. It doesn't seem like that's going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge obstacle, and it very much tracks with the zeitgeist that I'm trying to understand, which is that there's a desire for collective politics, but at the same time, the people who are most vocal about it seem to also hold very antisocial interpersonal attitudes. Like, this was something I was talking to a friend actually recently about, particularly about the environmentalism and the green movement. How it's a bit funny to me how after decades of the public being eroded and its places of belonging really suffering and declining, that now after that long development, and that we're all so that we've grown so hostile to not hostile, but let's say, people are less sociable and that community life has so declined. Now suddenly there's this appeal to we have to save the planet. I mean, it seems almost like a last ditch effort to create community in which all the actual bases for it have withered away, and we're kind of left with like this idea. Like this idea will bring the community together. Like we have to band together now to save the planet in some way. It's almost like an ironic. I mean, I don't know. What do you think of that? I find it to be just almost like like counter to what is actually happening on the ground.
Well, it's funny. I had a discussion with Progressive just the other night on that exact topic of environmentalism, and it didn't seem to me that that human satisfaction or human welfare, better term, is really the point of it. It's more of a if anything, taking care of the planet is a way of striking back at what humans have done to it. It somewhat anthropomorphizes the globe. So I'm not even sure that environmentalism is a way, like some kind of last-ditch effort to be communal in such a way that you care about your fellow human beings. It seems to have almost a punitive, misanthropic drive to it.
True. Yeah. No. I definitely there is elements of like a collapse mentality, like doom, that animates environmentalism. I think is super common, but at the same time, I think there is this. If you ask, I would assume that a certain segment of environmentalists would say that through a green politics, we can create a new public, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, certainly nominally, the main reason for this is to avoid cities that are underwater, which obviously has implications for how people live and everything, living comfortably. But yeah, you have to there's a kind of psychoanalyzing the left or political opponents or any real group is often sort of dubious, and I feel strongly that something is true, like that they're generally coming from there, but from that kind of place of some highly motivated emotional thing. But it's hard to prove, and it's I'm not sure what to do with that. But yeah, my sense is that there is a misanthropy and disdain for humanity behind a lot of environmentalism, and oddly, you see it with Davos Forum and things like that, where there's a general sense of reducing carbon footprint, limiting at least physically our impact in the world, which of course, blends right into living virtually and thinking that great tech progress is, chatbots and conversational AI and other intangible, ephemeral things. So, yeah, I mean, I threw a bunch of stuff out there, and there's a lot to unpack, I know, but yeah, there's a way in which, socialists who are at least ostensibly against Silicon Valley, that the general thrust of their the attitude that undergirds their politics kind of works well with the TikTokification and the social mediaification and living quietly and glued to your phone. They don't quite appreciate, I think, that the people on the left who hate Elon Musk or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I do find it still shocks me that that kind of militancy that I see in terms of politics online. It shocks me because I remember when I was 16, 17, frankly, I was very much an ideologue. I was left-oriented. And I felt as though there was a sense of opposition where I felt like the culture was not with me on that, and I was standing outside of it in many ways. Because the left really was not, let's just say the politicization of that kind of partisanship that today defines social media and everything else was not as visible. So you had people getting canceled and whatnot, but it wasn't like an overwhelming force like it is today. And that's when I started to wonder, like, okay, wait, maybe there's like emotional conduits to this that's not purely ideology. Like, this is kind of outside the realm of ideology now. And I know psychologizing, political subgroups is super, the basis is tenuous. It's not very scientific or anything. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, you know, people have done, I've read some great stuff. People have done profiles on political subgroups and everything else. And that's all interesting to me. But you look at the subgroup and you look at all their idiosyncrasies or whatever, their belief systems, their worldview, and then you place that person in the social environment, which, I try to describe in my piece, and then you get a whole other understanding of their motivations. Like perhaps this is social resentment, perhaps this is a reflection of a lack of, other places of belonging outside of the internet. Maybe the internet is an amplifier of anxiety. Like if you place the person in the social environment, you get a different understanding than if you purely look at the subculture. And that's why I'm interested in politics, not exclusively from the perspective of what people believe, but like what animated them to take those positions to begin with. And I feel like now we're living in a time when people's positions are very much in flux, and there's a lot of projection going on politically because of this dissatisfaction that I think is being amplified by people's way of life and internet and everything else. And what you're left with is what we talked about already, that kind of parasociability mixed in with perhaps a desire to be saved, perhaps resentment, perhaps you hold a grudge against you not getting your due or whatever you feel like you should be owed by society. And that's how I end my piece, with thinking about how that's bound to tug on the political arena in the next few decades. And the social question, as it were, is only now starting to really come to the fore. And I think it's going to be a dominant talking point for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, one thing you don't really hear anymore is the notion that they want us divided. Divide and conquer, some kind of strategy of corporations and governments.
Yeah,
you don't really hear that anymore. Increasingly people are just completely upfront about the problem with politics being fellow Americans. It's these people over there that vote a certain way because they have a terrible lifestyle and terrible idea of what a good society looks like in their heads, and that affects politics. And in a way, they're just kind of like cutting to the chase or seeing through to the essence of politics, and realizing that, in fact, democracy is what they dislike. They don't like the fact that Trump voters have as much say. Even during Occupy, I feel like Occupy was the last gasp of this kind of, they are attempting to divide and conquer us way of looking at things. Even the 99% suggests.
absolutely, yeah.
And in that time, we've become sort of lost our innocence about what the source of the problem in the country is. It's other Americans with bad ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would agree with that characterization. And another thing that's also disappeared entirely, which used to be a core leftist critique or whatever, was a critique of consumerism and production of desires, and how people are manipulated by entities that would be, commercial entities, market entities. That used to be a common point of conversation, a common rallying cry for the new left of the 60s.
Right.
That we are, sorry, yeah.
Oh no, yeah. I just people don't really say that much anymore. It's there is a kind of capitalist realism thing going on, whereby it's increasingly hard for anyone to think outside of the kind of confluence of corporation and government that is, and really technological forces that are sort of grooming us all low key to behave a certain way. I feel like there's this torrent of current things and a kind of present momentism that is just really, really overwhelming. And that itself comes from, social media and 24/7 news and smartphones. So, what's happening right now is so overwhelming. It gets difficult to maintain a kind of big picture point of view, more so than it was in the past.
Yeah, but that anti-consumerist ethic, I think, it used to animate. I mean, it wasn't even when I was like, getting politicized or whatever. When I was 17, 18, I was I remember I had a subscription to Adbusters, and I read a Crime Think or whatever. And I was thinking to myself, oh, wow, this is like I mean, the magazine prided itself on being not commercial or something. And there was this ethic also in the DIY music scene also about not being commercial, this anti-consumerism. And all of that, I get the impression like it's evaporated completely. I don't even know what happened to Adbusters. They used to be a big magazine in like in
Yeah,
the underground scene. But
I
I
did see, just real quickly, I did see an issue of Adbusters last year, like last summer. I think it was at a Barnes and Noble.
oh
Um,
wow.
it's sad that Barnes and Noble is one of those reliable newsstands left, but ironic,
Yeah, a lot of them are closing down. There's not even that many
right?
of them left.
But anyway, the politics of Adbusters that I could discern was just pro proxy war in Ukraine, disliking Putin. And I'm not trying to derail the conversation to discussion of that, but um, I don't know how much anti-consumerism really has to do with that. But
Exactly. Somehow everything has collapsed into being a into being like a weirdly like ironic pro-regime in many ways, like pro-status quo, but also ironic distance and criticism. Like Adbusters, I know in its anti-consumerist attitudes, how the magazine used to be. But there were others too, and I don't read it anymore, but I can just say from other leftist magazines, uh, a lot of the stuff, a lot of that got started, Adbusters in particular, got started after the, really caught on after the anti-World Trade Organization protests in 1998.
oh,
That's when
how
a lot of,
how dated
sorry?
is that? I mean, being against globalization now is a major
Exactly.
week
That
off.
was part of a anti-globalization left, which saw itself as pushing back against not just market, like this kind of commercialized global marketplace of, which homogenized everything and flattened everything. That was their criticism. And then it's somehow that position now is like like it's not even visible anymore because I mean, frankly, the populist right has completely taken over the anti-globalization rhetoric, and I don't really see much of it coming from the left anymore, which is a damn shame because that type of rhetoric is like very effective. It's also, frankly, I agree with a lot of it, like criticisms of globalization. But it's just interesting if you track the origin of that criticism. You go back to 1998, and there was the leftist anarchist contingents fighting the World Trade Organization in the streets, and that's where Crime Think got started. That's where Adbusters really blew up after that. So yeah, a lot of things got flipped. It's just it's like a weird inverse world.
Yeah, I guess to try to sort of steelman that position, they might say something like, well, anti-globalization has reduced in importance because now we're fighting far more existential and immediate concerns, such as protecting the lives of trans people from being beaten to shit.
Right.
So there's a sense of urgency to one's, body, frankly, I guess, that makes some of this everything from biopolitics to anti-globalization, these kind of deep big think stuff, it's just forced it into the background now.
Yeah, I don't really see much space for it nowadays, and I feel like a lot of people nowadays also are because of that. Uh, they're kind of politically adrift, and that's also something that's worth talking about some more. A lot of people do. In general, there's been a big de-alignment between people identifying as independent, not either party. Although the public sphere may seem highly politicized, I do think there is an emergent anti-political mood, like an anti-ideologue mood that usually manifests in low trust in the state, low trust in public opinion and the media. That I think is a far more powerful conduit of political activity than anybody screaming about an ideological position nowadays. It's almost like the majority would probably agree that I mean, approval rating for Congress is what, like 10%. I mean, that's probably the most rallying cry anybody could possibly, have right now.
Yeah. And the fact that even though, Congress is so disliked and yet no one can organize to do anything about it, I think gets back to the notion that we know too much about our political opponents now. We can't get together to stop some kind of impending legislation, even if left and right can agree on a positive outcome from that. The fact that let's say if you're on the left, the fact that the right agrees with you on that is reason to distrust your own position. Like, why do they agree with me on that? Like, what would the outcome be that I can't quite discern that would actually be harmful to the left? If the right is into it, that makes me suspicious. There's a kind of, if they're into it, I'm out of it angle to things now.
Yeah, that's actually, it's super interesting because it's something I covered like a few weeks ago about. There was a review, I think it was in I forgot where, London Review of Books or something. It's about a book that came out late last year, about how people. It was a book about how people abuse narratives nowadays, and storytelling has been abused online. And this relates to what you say, because sometimes if you stake a position and it socially signals to somebody that you may be in a certain camp, immediately it's disregarded and it's like attacked. So, for example, like if you're, it really distorts the whole political arena, where we had a situation like with, I don't know, this was very common in like 2020 when we were talking about the lab leak theory, and people were like, oh, we don't even want to consider it because it's a Fox News talking point. And it all got really warped into like, a position is not assessed whether or not it's true. It's assessed on whether or not it fits a particular narrative. And if it's not amenable to a narrative, it's discarded, or it has to be vilified, And that's kind of how the internet works. I mean, it's really social signifiers all the way. So, if you're giving off the wrong signifier, wrong vibe or whatever, people tear you down. And the internet is really a conduit of that.
I think that's a good example of something that can't be chalked up to any given side's psychology. It's not really susceptible to a good psychoanalysis effort. It really is the manifestation of techno-commercial trends.
Yeah.
It's this social media panopticon we live under. That's not due to any leftist philosophy or right. Well, partly a rightist philosophy, I suppose. It's downstream of kind of Anglo-American merchant conservatism or something. But I think that has a lot to do with what we're seeing now. The strength of an argument taken in isolation matters less than what you imagine your outgroup will do with that argument. And
exactly. And we understand. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh no.
But we. Yeah.
I was just going to say, because it makes you wonder what got anyone to be on the left or right in the first place, if not considering these ideas on their own. It can't purely be driven by what you think the other side will do with it, or whether they're into it or not. Left and right takes ownership of certain ideas. And if you peel back arguments, you can still see a kind of through line that determines if someone is left or right. Like the right is generally more okay with hierarchy, and the left wants to sort of flatten hierarchies. And you can still see that, but increasingly one's position is taken up by just seeing what the other side is doing first, even though the other side is supposedly, that side's philosophical composition is supposed to be due to having reflected on things that are not, determined by what other people are doing, but just contemplation. So it's all being socialized now. Socialized socialism and socialized rightism.
Yeah, there used to be this expectation in psychology that people are rational agents in a way, like they can rationally deduce perhaps optimal outcomes for themselves, or maybe they could rationally be convinced of things. And of course that's true, but there are also people interpret the world through stories and narratives as much as they do through reason. And I mean, commercialization taps into this very, directly by creating stories for its, production of desires and products. Like, we're inundated with that already, like from the get-go. So it's not really anything new. But what is new is that online is that if you're dealing with like a continuum of just information overload, of course, what sticks is narrative. Like storification of everything is central to how we interact with the internet. And of course, they become the battlegrounds for how we interpret politics because they are everything rallies around, they're like the flagpole everything rallies around. It's the narrative. So if something happens to, take place that is not amenable to a narrative, I mean, that's a problem. So and then is dealt with oftentimes, how the media operates. It's dealt with either through being memory hold or it's vilified or whatever. But it's really the internet stories make sense of the internet, and narratives have really been overbearing in their ability to determine what people think nowadays. And that's, yeah, like you said, it's not a particular problem of any particular political orientation. It's just a reality of how human beings are socialized.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what happened with how to think about COVID, for instance. I mean, we might dichotomize between, say, the arguments that you can trace back to an obvious leftist foundation or rightist foundation versus things that in the internet age emerged almost arbitrarily on one side or the other, and then you have path dependency, and then it just becomes what the right or left does, even though you could easily imagine it being the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, say, trans politics in general, that definitely fits left more than right. But COVID was fairly novel. That it could have gone either way, and we saw in real time which direction that went. And so now it's just sort of locked into place. And then the next time a pandemic comes, left and right can look to this precedent, with as far as what to do going forward with that new COVID or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree because I mean, if we were talking about conservatism of 60 years ago, when it was more paternalistic, perhaps that conservatism would have responded to COVID with a pro-lockdown stance, and the left, if it was the new left, perhaps they would be more against such social restrictions. But
Yeah.
it's just the political arena, as it were. Yeah, it turned that way, and then the narratives were set in stone. And next thing you know, criticizing certain aspects of excessive lockdown done by states is considered a right-wing position, which is absurd.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's really an abuse of stories, is what it's an abuse of narratives, and I really hate seeing it. It makes me feel like the world is just being reduced to symbols and
Yeah.
narrative peddling and like swindlers and grifters. It's just like it's a huge problem.
Yeah, there's a guy named Brian Chow. I interviewed him, and he's kind of come up in the last year or two. He's sort of, I don't know if you've heard the term gray tribe. He's kind of a what passes for right wing in California, but would not generally be right wing in a lot of regions and locations, times, and places. Anyway,
funny.
he talks about the notion of narrative hedging, the way that we can see people in real time begin to kind of walk back a narrative or modify it to accommodate the present moment, present political needs. And the fact that we can see all of that happening, for instance, stealth editing of articles. We there's enough transparency now that people will tweet that some newspaper of record or whatever had taken a completely different stance on something 100% analogous 5 minutes ago. And so it is sort of disillusioning how much of politics is kind of made up as it goes along. But again, there's a kind of core left or right themes that you can often detect if you look a little closer. I don't know how much things are genuinely novel, but yeah, narrative hedging, where there's a story, but it's always amenable to modification, determining what, or rather, depending on what the current needs are.
That's interesting. I do think there's a lot of that going on for sure.
Well, okay, so it's been over an hour now, and I said we'd just talk about that long. Unless there's anything else you want to bring up, we could probably wrap it up.
No, this was great. I really appreciate talking.
Cool.
Did we cover a lot of ground, actually? I'm just gonna end my last thought here on this actually, because what I didn't mention is one of the reasons I wrote my social recession piece is because I actually have a tangible, like lived comparison in which I would prefer that's not, this. And that's how I see how my grandma lives, I mean, she has friends over all the time. She sits in front of her house and like is 90 years old and so sharp and like smart, like, has
Yeah.
a very healthy life altogether, like socially, in terms of like, her health. Everybody knows her. She's like a very well balanced person in that regard. And I respect that so greatly because I mean, it's a different upbringing and everything else. She had a hard life growing up, World War II. She was born in 1933. But I think there's something. It's one thing to criticize the current environment and not, have something else in mind. But I do generally talking to her, I feel like there's this, like, there's like a gap, and I really just respect her being just kind of like this antidote in many ways.
Yeah.
I cherish that. Yeah.
She's sitting there as a rebuttal and she doesn't even know it,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I love that. That's like an amazing, just talking to her. I really cherish that.
Yeah. I mean, if I make it to 90, odds are I won't, but and I don't say that to be, dark about my life or anything, but most people won't make it to 90. But if I did, I'm certain I'm not going to be having a bunch of people come over.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
We are
thing. Like
we in general cannot look forward to that. And that's sad. And we should really just
yeah, that's the huge difference. Like I mean, okay, I hope I don't age like, and a bitter old lonely man or anything, but at the same time, I'm definitely not going to be as graceful as, I'm describing my grandma here.
Yeah.
That's
You know, I
that lifestyle ain't with us anymore, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of pod life purely online, and I don't want to overstate things. It's not purely online. I realize that. I mean, there was a video out of San Francisco recently of a huge fight at the mall, a bunch of
Oh yeah.
teenagers, and it's funny because I contrast that sometimes with all the pod life rhetoric, and I'm like, well, say what you will, they're not living a pod life. They are very much living in meat space, and I wonder if
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird bifurcation where
Yeah, but describing it as meat space, that's a terminally online phrase.
yeah, I know. If I were if
No,
I
no, you're right though. I get what you mean. Yeah.
deep space with those kids, they'd be like, "Man, what the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah, for real, I know. It's weird when I see when I see strange things in public, I'm kind of like, "Oh, we still got it," Like it's
Yeah,
like, like it's still crazy out there. Like at least it's not boring, like I mean that's kind of cynical, but it's,
yeah. So here's an example. I'm not trying to veer off into another big discussion. I know we're wrapping it up, but I know
yeah.
that the people who complain about pod life and everyone's just online, it's not really majorly right wing, but it's maybe 50-50. I feel it sort of leans toward
Yeah.
right wing or the people who are at least lumped in with the right, even though they'll often burnish their leftist bona fides. So the people who will talk about that also hugely lament the crime and mall fights and things happening on the street, and I wonder if there's a little bit of tension there because if we're presented with you can live on the street with whatever debauch or sense of community is still involved there, or you can be 100% online. Oh, I don't know which one I'd take. I mean, I'd probably still go online because I'm ultimately a bougie college guy, But it's sad that like the streets are being left to only the worst possible
Yeah.
form of meat space
I,
living.
I, I feel you. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, you kind of saw that in during the lockdown. I mean, I wasn't here as I was actually studying abroad at the time in 2020. But I had some friends here who were video chatting me, and they said like, "Oh, it's crazy! Like down the street from me, like where people would congregate, he had like a big parking lot next to his house, and there'd be people on their motorbikes like revving and like showing off their cars and whatnot. Like it was really like kind of a free for all out there in many ways. Uh, that's what happens when everybody's in the pod and the public is ceded to pretty much just like cops and people who are
Yeah.
causing trouble, like.
Yeah, I think they call that sideshow. We have that in
Yeah.
well, in San Francisco, I actually saw a sideshow, where the young people, 20 somethings and maybe some 30 somethings, teenagers, they'll congregate to watch people like tear up the streets with their cars. And for the first
Yeah.
time, and I feel like this could only happen during lockdown. For the first time in the last couple of years, I saw that happen like downtown San Francisco, where there's normally no room at all for that to happen. It's like a suburban thing, but it happened even
Yeah.
because the public square had been so abandoned. They literally had the room.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm the type of person who definitely would want to see that. Like I've been to a few of these like car shows that happened in Jersey, down like near the Hudson River, and it's just so bizarre. Like I didn't get to see them at the height of 2020, but they were every Tuesday they would hang out there and show off their rims on the cars and whatnot, and it's kind of it's like a weird little community life in the parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, so my sort of need for orderliness, that kind of kernel of conservatism that wants that is at odds with despairing over pod life and complaining about people out on the street. People lying on the street doing fentanyl and whatever. Yes, that's just sad. That's no way to live
Yeah.
peacefully and out in the world. But sideshows, that sort of skirts the line. It is antisocial, but it's not. It's not
A lot of
fun.
people feel that
People kill
tension.
and stuff.
A lot of people feel that tension, honestly.
Yeah.
Like this, they live in an orderly way because of just, technological life at home, but they struggle with, I don't know, I feel like the desire for complete orderliness is often misplaced. I don't think it's really possible, nor would I really want it necessarily.
Yeah.
Kind of stunts creativity in some ways. Like it's kind of what we talked about earlier, that conviviality, spontaneity of the public sphere. I mean, that has to be part of it. It can't be like totally curated, as things are today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I'll let you go now, and take care.
Yeah. This is fun. Take care, man.